Coming up, we have a reading selection from author Frances S. Brown on her new novel, Maternal Threads.
Hello, I'm Frances S. Brown, and I'm here for CJLeger.com. Today I will be promoting my newest book, Maternal Threads, and will be sharing a small portion of the story with you. Maternal Threads is a memoir of discovery. My quest to explore my maternal heritage whisked me away to the flapper era in 1920s Greenwich Village, New York. My research raised questions, uncovered secrets, and founded a theory that my mother's older half-sister, the woman I knew as Aunt Charlotte, may actually have been my grandmother. Maternal Threads is currently available in paperback and ebook at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and for Kindle. The price ranging from $3.99 to $15.99. The audiobook is coming very soon and will be available at Amazon and Audible.com. Enjoy the reading, and I hope to see some of you at my next book signing at the Book Lovers Gourmet in Webster, Massachusetts on September the 12th. I will also be participating in an author and illustrator event at the Thrall Library in Middletown, New York on September 26th. I will be reading from Chapter 1, starting on page 1, and reading until page 6. Chapter 1, 2009, Revelation. My life-changing moment wasn't really very dramatic. The revelation didn't manifest at 3 a.m., alone on a bathroom floor in a pool of tears. I didn't awaken in a stranger's bed with a massive hangover, having not the slightest clue where I'd been the night before. In short, I didn't experience a mental breakdown. I didn't snap, though you might say my revelation did come about due to a snapping of sorts. My eyes were opened in a more subtle way. I was 52 years old and had raised 3 reasonably normal children, a daughter and twin sons. I remained happily married to the same man who fathered them for over half my life. I'd finally found my career niche after working in the same field for 25 years. My good health was probably less due to proper diet and sufficient exercise than lucky genetics. Most people would have said I'd arrived. Perhaps I had. Just not all of me. We were living in Massachusetts, which placed 21 years and 1,300 miles between my only daughter and me. But thanks to the modern conveniences of a cellular signal and hands-free devices, we commuted together every morning. We both rose and began our workdays early, in certain seasons before even the sun was awake. "Hey, Mama. Good morning." "Hey, baby. How you feeling?" She was 31 by then, but no matter how old she got. Susie, quite predictably, launched into her daily spirited soliloquy denouncing the indecency, immorality, and insanity of working before 9 o'clock in the morning. How she was running late again. How she stayed up way too late again. And how the guy driving the car in front of her was a complete asshole for stopping at a yellow light. Now, she would never get to work on time. As her perpetually too loud voice blasted into my head out of the hands-free earpiece, I passed a jogger bouncing along wrapped in neon green spandex. I remarked, "Susie, I don't need to start my day with an aerobic workout. Talking to you is all the adrenaline I can handle." Then I smiled to her giggle, and we went on to the small talk chatter that mothers and daughters oftentimes share. My daughter was, and still is, my best friend, though I am sad to say I didn't share this kind of relationship with my own mother. Don't misunderstand. My mother was ideal in every classic definition of the role. But as I matured and met her on equal ground, Mom gradually evolved into a cardboard cutout, like one of those vivid-hued but perfectly flat paper dolls I played with as a child. That's how I remembered her, since up until the day she died, I knew very little about her family or her childhood. Her closest living relative, the woman I knew as Aunt Charlotte, was nothing like Mom. I'd met a few distant cousins, questionably linked, only once or twice. Mom's ancestry remained mystery, a taboo subject, one that changed her mood to anxious and sad if pressed to elaborate. As for maternal roots, I really didn't have any. Attempts to draw out my family tree to a semblance of balance repeatedly fizzled and died. Although I'd remained stable all my life, at least in marriage and career, over the latter 10 years I'd become somewhat of a wanderer. We raised the children in Florida, near their grandparents. But once the kids were grown and on their own, we bounced from Florida to Texas to North Carolina, all in a span of 5 years. As a laboratory technologist, I had the freedom to live and work almost anywhere I wanted. My husband, 15 years my senior, had retired early. He loved to travel and have new adventures, and had, at least so far, followed me wherever my nomadic heart led. Why had we moved around so much? We weren't intentional transients. I'd landed wonderful jobs. We'd rent for the first few months, but then purchased lovely homes in great communities, every time convinced we were there to stay. We'd made new friends, planted gardens, found new favorite restaurants, and lived like newlyweds, starting our lives over in a brand new corner of the world. Yet, I remained unfulfilled. I was happy, but somehow still searching. But for what? What more could a woman possibly want? We'd built a brand new home in the western North Carolina foothills, complete with mountain views and a hot tub on the elevated deck. I worked in a small community hospital 8 miles away. The shrubs we'd painstakingly planted along the foundation had barely taken root when I spotted the online posting for the job in New England. I jokingly mentioned it to my husband. "It's in a lab at a school of veterinary medicine," I said. Up until then, I'd always worked on the human side of healthcare, hospitals, a private laboratory. "Let's go," he said without hesitation. "You know me. As long as I'm with you, I'll be happy anywhere." Ah, the anchor he has been to my life. Such chivalrous loyalty. No wonder I've held on to the same man for so long. Springtime in New England was miraculous. I'd forgotten the exhilaration when, after a long, snowy winter I'd not endured since my childhood in New York State, bare branches turned green seemingly overnight. Buds burst into leaf and bloomed as if nature simply crept through the countryside one night, opening each tree like a verdant umbrella. On one of those morning commutes, Susie chattered into one side of my head as a line of ornamental trees I pass en route every day dazzled me. Bradford pears. They stood 4 abreast in full blossom. White petals packed each erect oval so closely they shimmered like spring snow against the glow of the sunrise. I noticed sadly one of the trees had not weathered the winter well. The last ice storm was to blame. The branches of that delicate species didn't flex much before they snapped. Half of the tree's usual symmetry was gone, carved out as though a hungry giant had plundered through and taken a bite. That lovely May morning in 2009, more than halfway through my life, I finally recognized what was missing. I was half a tree. I needed to complete the equation. I knew plenty about my father's side of the family, but little to nothing about my mom's. These days, one would think it's easy, what with Ancestry.com and numerous other online resources. But I knew so little about Mom's family, I couldn't even get off the ground. Her maiden name was different from her half-sister's, and I didn't know what Charlotte's maiden name was anyway. And by then, they were both gone. There were some records, Mom's birth and baptismal certificates. My younger brother, Frank, and I uncovered them after our parents passed away, but he had custody of those documents. Frank had done some digging into ancestry sites after our parents passed, but was only successful on Daddy's side. He proudly supplied me with a paternal family tree, printed out on dozens of sheets of paper he'd carefully taped into a paper carpet big enough to cover my living room floor. I knew the names of my great-great-great-grandparents, who were born and lived in Venice and Naples, Italy. On Mom's side, he'd been able to find virtually nothing. That didn't seem to bother him, since Mom was, well, Mom. She was Dad's wife. She was our mother. Ruth Lillian Fisher had been virtually absorbed into Dad's family. Who she was before that, where the roots of her own family tree had germinated, didn't seem to matter once she married my father. That was enough for my brother. All three of my brothers, actually. We'd all grown up in a loving, secure family environment with lots of extended gatherings. But those gatherings took place with my father's relatives. We spent every holiday and almost every Sunday at Grandma's house in Brooklyn, the only grandmother we had, with our aunts and uncles, my father's brother and sisters. The only times I could remember spending at Aunt Charlotte's house, my father wasn't with us. As a woman, there was a part of me missing. I needed to know more about my mother's heritage. Before I could understand myself, I needed to complete the puzzle. I needed to fill out the branches of my half-tree. So where could I begin? The only place to go was back in time. Aunt Charlotte was Mom's only relative we ever spent appreciable time with. By then, when I realized I needed to know more, Charlotte had already been dead over 30 years. She was my only key. My memories of her, from when I was just a little girl, suddenly held new significance. Since my husband and I were back in the Northeast, we lived only a few hours from the place where Aunt Charlotte lived and died. It was time to go back and pay memory a visit. Thank you all for joining us for this exclusive online reading for CJLeger.com. You can follow the site on Twitter at CJLeger, and you can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, at Frances S. Brown, and visit my website, www.francessuzannebrown.com. Thank you all.
This has been a reading for CJLeger.com.